Okay, we're talking about the first Battle of Bull Run, also known as Manassas, and we'll explain why. First Battle of Bull Run, Manassas. Now, prior to this first battle, President Lincoln's going to have to choose an overall commander of Union forces, someone that will be in charge of the Union forces during this conflict. And the man that he chose, and this will be the start of a recycling process, you won't believe how many different commanders that Lincoln chose during the course of the Civil War. Never could find one he liked. But he starts this whole process by choosing a familiar name, General Winfield Scott, as overall commander of Union forces in the Civil War. He'll be the man responsible for the strategy and command of Union forces, General Winfield Scott. Where do we remember him from? So obviously he's getting what? Up there in age, is he not? Okay, so he's an elderly commander, okay? Now, at this point, President Lincoln and really the North in general really believed that the South would give up as soon as they suffered defeat in battle. That was kind of the thought process as we moved into this. Remember, Lincoln asked for 75,000 volunteers. It was a 90-day enlistment. They had been training and all this. And the North and President Lincoln really believed strongly that once we defeat the South in battle, they'll give up this secession and this thought process of going to war within our own country. So the Northern goal right now in the Civil War is simply march to the Confederate capital of Richmond, win there, and end the Civil War in one battle. That's really what they believed what would happen. So the Northern goal was to march to the Confederate capital of Richmond, Virginia, win a victory there over the South, and the party would be over. We'd be back to normal. So the North was very confident, and so were Northern soldiers. And as they marched toward Richmond, they yelled the famous battle cry, "On to Richmond." That was the big thing. On to Richmond. We'll beat the Southerners at Richmond and this thing will be over. It'll be a quick little war. Now, do you think that General Winfield Scott led those troops to Richmond? He did not, because he was too elderly, too old for battle. So he appointed General Irvin McDowell. And these are these pictures I gave you if you're interested in what these people look like. Irvin McDowell was chosen by General Winfield Scott to lead Union troops into battle as they marched toward Richmond, Virginia. So Union General Winfield Scott, who was too old for battlefield command, appointed General Irvin McDowell as field commander of Union forces. Now, at this time, the Union Army consisted of 35,000 troops. Okay? They asked for 75,000 volunteers, and they trained those volunteers. But right now, the 35,000 is what they consider ready for battle. And most of these 35,000 that we have as Union Army are at the end of their 90-day enlistment. They're about done. And again, they think they're going to march into Virginia, win at Richmond, and we'll be done, and the whole thing will be over. They'll come home as heroes. So the Union Army consisted of 35,000 troops, many of those at the end of their 90-day enlistments. So on July 16th of 1861, July 16th of 1861, General McDowell and the Union soldiers left Washington, D.C. and started their march toward Richmond. July 16th, 1861, General McDowell and the Union soldiers left Washington toward Richmond. Once Union forces got very close to Richmond, they took up position at Manassas Junction, Virginia. They took up a position. What does that mean if you take up a position, Brady? Stop and get ready to defend, okay? So the Union forces take up position near Manassas Junction, Virginia. And the reason they took up position there, it was a railroad center. and it was located, pretty close to Washington, D.C., and it was located on Bull Run Creek. So Union forces take up position near Manassas Junction, Virginia, which was a railroad center near Washington, D.C., which was located near Bull Run Creek. So you see the first battle of Bull Run, Manassas. You can kind of see where it ties in. So what about the Confederates? They consisted of 22,000 men, the Confederate Army. And they were commanded by General P.G.T. Beauregard. So the Confederate Army consisted of 22,000 men and were commanded by General P.G.T. Beauregard.
What's his name?
That was his name, P.G.T. Beauregard. Had initials instead of name. Now, where did the Confederate Army station themselves? Where was the Union Army? Near Manassas Junction, right? The Confederate Army was at Manassas Junction. Why were they there? Because they were protecting what? That railroad center. That was a key. Both sides wanted to control the railroad center. The North was coming down to get it. The South was protecting it. So they're in very close proximity of each other, aren't they? 35,000 Union soldiers and 22,000 Confederate soldiers, both are very close to Manassas Junction, Virginia, which is a railroad center on Bull Run Creek. Now I'll give you a little bit about how confident the Union was on this thing. It was really kind of interesting. The Union Army was so overconfident that they stopped and picked blackberries on the way to the battle. That's how serious they were. They were so overconfident they actually stopped and picked blackberries on the way. The Union Army was so overconfident of victory that soldiers stopped and picked blackberries along the way. Now, back in Washington, there were a lot of politicians that thought that the North would win easy also. Matter of fact, one of them said, listen to this quote, he said he would be, quote, happy to drink all the blood spilled in this little war. He was so confident that we would overrun the Confederates like that he said he would, quote, be happy to drink all the blood spilled in this little war. Which meant he didn't think there was going to be much blood spilled if he was willing to drink it. Well, I'll tell you what, if he'd have kept his promise, after 4 years he would have had quite a drink. Yep. Yeah, you can do. Okay, so one prominent politician back in Washington, D.C. stated that he would be, quote, happy to drink all the blood spilled in this little war. This almost was like a sporting event. Sightseers brought picnic lunches to watch the battle as if they were going to a football or basketball or volleyball game. They brought picnic lunches to watch because they thought this was just going to be an easy victory for the North. Who were these crazy sightseers that actually had the gall to bring picnic lunches to watch the battle? There were senators there, United States senators. There were prominent judges in this country from the North that went to watch. High society women that came to watch. Wives and girlfriends of these important people came to watch as if it was like a sporting event. Just incredible. Well, instead of a short battle, the Battle of Bull Run lasted all day with Confederate soldiers engaging Union soldiers. All day. These people thought this thing would be over in, minutes. The thing lasted all day. Now, picture this in your mind. Right off the bat, we had confusion on the battlefield. There were no standard military uniforms issued for this first battle of the Civil War. So you didn't have any distinct way to decide the difference of who was on which side. Now, during this battle, most Northern soldiers wore their militia uniforms. Their state militia, guess what color they were? Gray. Actually, they were gray. So there was confusion right off the bat. So during this first Battle of Bull Run, many of the soldiers from the North wore their state militia uniforms, which ironically were gray. So many times during this battle, soldiers lined up against each other, both wearing the same color uniforms. How do you think Confederate soldiers, they thought, man, we better avoid confusion and not shoot each other. What did they do to avoid the confusion? Anybody want to guess what they did? They took white cloth and they tied it around the arms and around their hat bands so that they could tell which of the soldiers were on their side, because the uniforms are both gray. So Confederate soldiers, to avoid confusion, were ordered to tie white cloth around their arms and around the brim of their hats so they could tell which gray were on their side. Well, early in the morning of July 21st, 1861, early in the morning of July 21st, Union forces break camp. And they head to confront the Confederate Army. Early in the morning of July 21st, 1861, they leave camp. Where are they camped? Centerville, Virginia. So they were just outside Manassas Junction at Centerville. And on July 21st, 1861, Union forces leave their camp near Centerville, Virginia, and approach the Confederate Army. Now the Union strategy was kind of weird here. What they were trying to do, you got the Confederate lines here. The Union strategy was to put pressure both on the left sides and the right sides of the Confederate line. So you're going to have one surge hit to the left side, one to the right. And a third Union force was going to try to sneak around and get behind the Confederate line. So that was kind of the Union strategy. They were going to pressure both the left and right sides of the Confederate line, while a third Union force was going to try and sneak around the rebels' left flank and get in behind them. That was the idea. And at first it worked to perfection. At first it worked absolutely to perfection. Now, Confederate troops cracked under Union pressure and ran to a nearby area called Matthews Hill. So Confederate troops cracked under Union pressure and ran toward Matthews Hill in retreat. Well, about the time that they started to retreat, Confederate General Thomas Jackson arrived with reinforcements, and those reinforcements he had stationed on Henry Hill. So about the time these Confederates are breaking ranks from the original battle and heading towards Matthews Hill in retreat, Confederate General Stonewall Jackson is bringing in reinforcements, and his reinforcements are occupying Henry Hill. Well, Jackson witnessed these retreating rebel soldiers, and he stopped them. And he rallied them back to the fight. He didn't want them retreating because he had brought what? Reinforcements. So General Jackson's witnessing these retreating rebel soldiers towards Matthews Hill, and he stops them and rallies them. Well, a witness to this was Confederate General Bernard Bee. He witnessed Jackson stopping these retreating soldiers from the battle toward Matthews Hill. Confederate General Bernard B. witnessed this. And as he watches this brave act on the part of General Jackson, rallying these soldiers back to the battle, Bernard B. states, "Look at Jackson, standing like a stone wall." And from that point on, what was Jackson's nickname? Stonewall Jackson. That's where it came from. So in the initial charge at the First Battle of Bull Run, Union forces hit from the left and the right. They get behind the Confederates. They begin to retreat towards Matthews Hill. General Thomas Jackson of the Confederates arrives with reinforcements. He sees the retreating Confederates coming towards Matthews Hill. As he sets his reinforcements on Henry Hill, he turns those soldiers back to the fight, rallies them back. And General Bernard B. makes the comment, "Look at Jackson, standing like a stone wall." And from that point on, General Jackson earned the permanent nickname Stonewall Jackson. Well, by 3 p.m. that day, the Confederates had rallied, and the tide had turned against Union forces. By 3 p.m., the Confederates had rallied, and the tide had turned against Union forces. And they began to retreat, the Union. And they began to retreat across Bull Run Creek over a bridge known as Stone Bridge. So the Confederates by 3 o'clock have rallied. They are pushing the Union. The Union is retreating, and they're retreating back over Bull Run Creek, over what the famous bridge known as Stone Bridge. So the Confederates have the Union on the run. Well, that was a little bit of surprise for those sightseers as they were rallying to get the hell out of there too. And we'll show you some examples of that later. But anyway, the First Battle of Bull Run is going to end in a rout for the Confederates, as Union forces have to scramble in a hasty retreat back across Bull Run Creek to D.C. So the Confederates rally, and they turn the tide. And by 3 o'clock, it's the Union that's retreating across Bull Run Creek. Now, this was the first tactical mistake in the Civil War on either side, because during this Union retreat, General Thomas Stonewall Jackson really urged General Beauregard to pursue the Union all the way back to Washington. Pursue them all the way back. Well, Beauregard did not take Jackson's advice. He believed he needed to stay put in Virginia to care for what? His wounded men. Okay? So Jackson tried to get Beauregard to attack or pursue the Union all the way back to D.C. And Beauregard decided not to take Jackson's advice. Instead, he stayed put in Virginia and cared for his wounded men. This was a big mistake. Historians believe that if the Confederate Army would have pursued the Union back to Washington, D.C., the war might have ended, as everyone predicted, only in favor of the South instead of the North, because we were not prepared back in D.C. So they should have pursued them. Because historians believe that if the Confederate Army would have pursued the Union forces back to Washington, D.C., the Civil War may have ended quickly as predicted in favor of the South. What were the casualties in this battle? And what are casualties again, so we know the definition? Killed, wounded, or captured. The Union suffered 2,950 casualties. 2,950. And the Confederates 1,750. So the casualties in the First Battle of Bull Run, 2,950 for the Union, 1,750 for the Confederates. Now, after this disastrous defeat at Bull Run, the Union's going to have to kind of set down and figure out a new strategy. And this is important that you know this because it's going to come back later. This new strategy that the Union will come up with is they're going to try to gain control of the Mississippi River and cut the Confederacy in half. That's going to be their goal. After this disastrous defeat at Bull Run, they're going to try to capture the Mississippi River and cut the Confederacy in half. Okay, I'll show you this first battle of Bull Run. It's a very good video. I think you'll enjoy it. Get your notes and note some things that maybe I didn't tell you, because I really can't tell you every single thing when it comes to this type of deal. Okay, Kellyanna, my dear, if you could get the lights and the door.